A federal judge has blocked Biden administration officials from telling the federal government to influence social media companies. A Trump-appointed federal judge barred federal agencies like CISA and the FBI and officials including the Surgeon General, Human Services Secretary, and White House Press Secretary from coordinating with social media companies about, quote, protected speech, which could dismantle efforts to fortify coordination between the two to suppress speech.
Love to see it. The ruling comes in response to a lawsuit filed by Republican-led states who contend government officials violated the First Amendment by censoring unfavorable views like vaccine hesitancy on social media throughout the pandemic. 2024 Democratic candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. hailed the decision on Twitter, highlighting that he is actually mentioned personally in the 155-page ruling. That portion of the decision pointed to an email that a Biden official sent Twitter just 3 days after the president took office, requesting them to remove an anti-COVID vaccine that RFK Jr. had posted a post about that. So this is huge. Now, this is just the first step. This is an injunction followed by this Louisiana judge. It can be appealed. So we're still in for the long haul here for those of us who are very concerned about the contact that the federal government had with social media companies throughout the pandemic on issues like COVID, vaccines, et cetera. Also, elections, Hunter Biden, all the stuff we talk about on the show all the time that Matt Taibbi and Schellenberger and others have done, and Li Fang have done so much reporting to bring to the public's attention. This is a win. This lawsuit brought by the states of Missouri and I believe Louisiana, contending that this contact violates the First Amendment. I've been very interested in seeing how this lawsuit would progress because it takes issue at the right parties. Instead of just complaining about what social media has done, it says, well, but they can do what they want. They're private companies. What we can stop is the federal government from telling them. And in this lawsuit, in the judge's decision, he really points to, we've covered so much egregious behavior from the federal government, but he points to additional things. Rob Flaherty, who is this administration official who was basically in charge of outreach to social media companies, sending extremely aggressive emails to social media companies saying, why is this still up? When he's talking about, in one case, it was a parody account of Joe Biden's granddaughter. Say, why is this still up? I demand, I'm waiting for you to do something about this. Not just going even beyond the, hey, here's a tweet. What do you think about this tweet kind of posture that they take a lot of times. So,
yeah, it pulled no punches. The decision described what's been going on as a federal censorship enterprise. And to your point, I do think it's really validation of a lot of the reporting that came out of the Twitter files insofar as it's moving this from a generalized complaint about social media companies to really focusing on who the bad guy is. I did see some question as to whether or not this has any negative implications for the government's ability to make to do its own speech in the public interest. There is a part of the opinion in the order he writes, nothing in this order prevents federal agencies from exercising permissible public government speech promoting government policies or views on matters of public concern. But I do think that sidesteps the issue, which is that the government did feel like it was making speech and trying at least to prohibit speech in what they perceive to be the public interest. And because of the way that COVID played out, with some of the early recommendations being not borne out from a public health perspective or from a scientific perspective, and the number of mistakes being made, and some things being said that weren't actually mistakes, but were kind of intentionally hiding things from the public to try to provoke a public response, right? All of that, now we know that in retrospect, it makes us feel like the government shouldn't have any role here at all and shouldn't be really trying to put its finger on the scale. I wonder if we would be feeling differently about this if the government were right in the recommendations that it had made, if vaccines were able to stop transmission and do some of the things they were initially alleged to have done, and how much of this is kind of a fact-dependent retrospective on what happened, and how much of this is like a rules in fact that we want to apply indiscriminately going forward.
I think you're totally correct to point out some of the in the decision, some of how it's not clear that the government might see it, oh yeah, we're still doing the permissible talking to social media companies, because it says, it says they can no longer meet with social media companies for the purpose of urging, encouraging, pressuring, or inducing removal, deletion, suppression, etc. And so there's a long list. There's like 10 things. You can't do all this stuff. And it's great. I love this list. But then there's that, well, just so we understand, you can still do all this. You can still inform social media companies of criminal activity or conspiracies. You can notify them of national security threats. You can inform them of threats to public safety, threats to elections. Again, a lot of the suppression was done under the auspices of election integrity. Or that's what they said they were doing.
Exactly. Remember, part of the Twitter files reporting, it described how the concern, the fear of Russian interference was so pervasive, and that there was so much messaging warning these companies that there could be election interference.
Sure.
And there was so much concern about repeating 2016, whatever you think happened in 2016. There was this public concern that they were going to hand the election again to Trump, doing what Putin or the Russians or whatever wanted to do, that they didn't actually have to do anything when the Hunter Biden laptop came up. There was already this culture of fear that they were going to make a mistake, that they chose not to take it down, right?
Again, on the list of activities still allowed, communicating with social media companies about informing or communicating with social media companies in an effort to detect, prevent, or mitigate malicious cyber activity. That describes exactly what they're doing. Now, I don't want to be overly pessimistic. This is a first stab, getting something on the books of saying some, from a legal standpoint, that some of the outreach from the federal government was improper. Has this judge, a local official in Louisiana, exactly drawn the line correctly and made a list of permissible and impermissible and solved the issue? Of course not. But I think it's good that there was a first step. Now maybe a higher court is going to fine-tune this a little bit. Ultimately, really, this should be a matter, frankly, for Congress. I mean, there should be legislation that is that is considered by elected representatives, that comes up with a policy whereby federal employees, we're okay with them doing this, they can't do X, Y, Z. I think ultimately that would be the right thing to do. But in lieu of that ever taking place or having taken place yet, I'm glad to have something on the books, and I bet further court decisions will even make that more.
And I do think that one way to go about this, resolving this issue, is to simply enshrine more transparency into the process. If there's a certain acknowledgement that it's always going to be subjective and difficult to determine if the government is making the kind of requests that might be appropriate and in the public interest versus not. The reason that we're even in the position to opine is because we had the Twitter files, which forced transparency. Now, the Twitter files was all retrospective and going back in the past. We have no idea what's been going on in the last 6-8 months or whatever it's been since Elon Musk has been at Twitter. And I think that these risks exist no matter who's the CEO, and I would like to see some continued transparency. There obviously are legal implications for him to continue to open the kimono on his own company versus just under somebody else's leadership. And I do wonder if we can kind of enshrine some transparency and not just have to rely on the kindness of any given CEO that happens to be in the position to show us what's really going on behind the scenes. That's especially true. One point I would make about this is that the judge, liberals can make of this what they want, but the judge is a Donald Trump appointed judge, and the emphasis in the decision and the order was on, it characterized the request as targeting conservative views. Now, Matt Taibbi, when kind of pressured by some on the left to explain what he searched for and what exactly the full document trove of the Twitter files reveals, said that he didn't look that hard at targeting of leftists because he was following the trail that appeared before him in terms of the FBI censorship and the like. But when pressured, said, well, yes, there was targeting of the left as well. That's just not what I was focused on. And some of the critique from the left has been your choice to characterize it in a certain way makes liberals less interested in this project to the detriment of the public. It makes conservatives more interested in a way that can feel partisan and like a political tool that may or may not be that invested in the underlying genuine speech concerns. And that if you want more public broad buy-in and you want people like the representative, Stacey Plaskett, to stop just politicizing this and trying to suppress this issue because it's a conservative-led issue in people's mind's eye, then you shouldn't continue to frame it this way. And it's interesting that there was a critique of Taibbi framing it as disproportionately Republican, and now you have this conservative judge picking this up and framing it as almost exclusively targeting conservative views.
Although
and
he
I
does
do
follow
wonder,
that by saying, as you pointed, the issues raised here go beyond party lines.
And they
So
absolutely
they
do. And so I'm just concerned about the public perception of this. I do hope that people beyond the conservative audience realize that this is something that everyone should be invested in, despite how it's being repeatedly framed.
Sure. And I think people on the left, independents, civil libertarian inclined progressives can see that and do see that. But the kind of the sort of centrist liberal establishment type person,
they were not happy with this.
Very bought into the idea. Yeah, the Washington Post article on this was baffling. It was just so, oh no, experts very worried that now there will be misinformation everywhere. That good faith efforts by the government to target misinformation are now have been undermined by this rogue Trump judge. That was their framing of this, of course.
Yeah.
Disgusting. We will absolutely keep talking about this, and we'll have more Rising in just a minute.